Welcome to the Better Sex Podcast. My name is Deborah Catt, and I am your shameless host. This is the Better Sex Podcast, where we have unfiltered conversations about sex and relationships and the many possibilities so that you can figure out what works for you and have better sex and satisfying relationships on your terms. I truly believe that a sexy world creates a happier and a safer world. And if you want to do your part to create a safe and sexy world, please hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Today, we are going to dive into the world of my guest, Artemisia de Vine. She is a sexual fantasy expert who teaches the world's leading sexperts the meaning of our sexual fantasies. Author of an upcoming book, The Spirituality of Smut. I can't wait to hear more about that. The surprising wisdom of sexual fantasies. She's a certified somatic sexologist, has a BA in anthropology, and a former sex worker as a professional dominatrix. On that note, I just have to say welcome, and I'm so happy that you're here. And just say that I'm really delighted to make this connection. It's a new and exciting connection. So I am looking forward to learning more about you along with my guests. And so tell me, how did you get here?
Oh, thank you so much for the warm welcome. I've been really looking forward to having this conversation with you as well. So you've been such a warm and inviting person, and you've got such a beautiful perspective towards sex. So I'm sure you've got lots of wisdom to offer as well in this episode.
Thank you. So how did you start? How did you get to be a sexual fantasy expert?
It's a good question, isn't it? There doesn't seem to be a lot of people focusing on sexual fantasies as their area of expertise. There's lots and lots of sex educators and sexologists who are focusing on how to be more present in your body, how to be more connected with your partner, how to improve techniques, how to resolve relationship problems, how to get consent, how to do techniques of kink and various different things. But there's a lot less focused on the psychological aspects of what turns us on. And I am, if you honestly, after working with thousands of clients, creating experiences in my former role as a sex worker and professional dominatrix, it is absolutely key. It's central. If you want mind-blowing sex or BDSM, you have to understand the role the mind plays in sex. And honestly, it was through my client reactions that I started to become fascinated with this aspect of ourselves. And also, if I take a few steps back, even before that, I was interested in sexual fantasies because I had my own sexual fantasies, which were very confusing to me initially when I first had them, because they were the exact opposite of how I wanted to be treated in real life. I was becoming actually excited by, being dominated, when the last thing I wanted to be dominated in real life. I wanted to get respect as a woman, and the last thing I wanted was non-consent, but non-consent was super exciting in my own personal fantasies. So I had to make sense of those as well. I needed to understand, why does the mind become excited by these things? Is it just something like, all of the things that I got to read about to find out, like I'm searching everywhere, trying to find out and make sense of the erotic mind. And I discovered a book called The Erotic Mind by Jack Moran, who's known amongst sexologists as somebody who you turn to as a sort of Bible, really, to turn to understand the erotic mind. And I'm totally grateful for his book and his work, and I wouldn't be able to be where I am without him. But he does reduce the source of all sexual fantasies to, in his words, unfinished childhood or adolescent business. He looks through the lens of a therapist. That's pathologizing, even when you're being open-minded and accepting. It does not It's not the right. We will get to what I think later in just a moment, but let's build your curiosity about that. But this there's other people who've been offering things too, like Michael Batter has an amazing book on arousal, and it's absolutely worth reading. He's made an enormous and very positive contribution to understanding what sexual fantasies are. But he also reduces them to pathogenic beliefs from your childhood that need and even though he's, again, very open-minded and doesn't try and make them go away and is happy to engage them and is a very switched-on person, I wanted to change the lens with which we're looking at these things. I'm looking at it from a sex worker lens, from lived experience of actually being paid to become the sexual fantasy of thousands of people and getting in there with the sweat and the bodily fluids and the emotional reactions moment to moment, right? And you notice how certain parts of fantasies have direct effects. I'm in there experiencing it, experimenting with it, and getting responses. And that opens up an entirely different perspective than somebody sitting behind a desk doing therapy with their clients around their sexual fantasies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that they're just stories. Sexual fantasies are stories. Oh my goodness, what if we look at them through the lens of the magic of stories? What do stories do? They transform us from one state of consciousness to another. That's what all stories do. If you go and watch a movie, you do think you're just being entertained. You just think it's fun. But actually, you're going there to feel, go on a journey that will change you by watching the characters. And you're there to feel all of the feelings, not just the nice ones. As you go through, you want to get angry at the villain. You want to feel triumphant when they get their comeuppance. You want to all of the things. But every single story is about desire. Every story is about desire. And it's about how we transform to meet our real desire, not the desire we thought we had. Let me explain what I mean by that a little bit.
Yes, I was going to say, tell me more about that.
Let's look at a story then, shall we? Let's just imagine there is a story about Joe who's trying to get to Las Vegas in time to win his wife back before she marries someone else. Right? He has a desire to get his wife back. Otherwise, there is no story. Because there is no story if everything's nice and it stays nice and there's some more nice and there's nothing to overcome. There's no goal to try and achieve. There's no story. So even in a subtle level, even when you think there's no desire, there is a desire. You take a closer look at the stories. We're doing a really exaggerated version of one now, but even the really sophisticated fancy pants breaking the genre stories are based on this. So he's got a desire to win his wife back. On the surface, his desire is to get to Las Vegas in time to win her back. And he's lost her because he's focused on work too much and he's neglected giving her his attention. He thought in his mind that he was working all of that much to earn the money to support the lifestyle that she wanted. He thought he was actually doing that for her. But in reality, he was really doing it for his own social status and caught up in a whole lot of cycles of things. That entire journey to Las Vegas is going to be the bulk of the story. And we're going to become very interested in how he, probably has a whole bunch of shenanigans with, like, say, a sidekick who comes with him and plays the role of being the annoying antagonist who does things and gets in the way, which forces him to become aware of certain things and transform and change. Let's say the sidekick is a playboy who makes them get late because he gets caught up in a motel at sexy times with somebody and then demonstrates a way of being with her that did not see her, was taking from her, not giving her, but being the playboy style, right?
Mhm.
And he's being selfish, and that makes them late. And maybe the main character who's trying to get to Las Vegas in time doesn't even put two and two together, but unconsciously he's starting to transform, going, this is what it's like to be, and with somebody who's being selfish while they're saying they're doing it for you, or like there's all sorts of things that will happen unconsciously, and he will change. And by the time he gets to the climax of the story, yes, I use that word, the climax of the story, he has changed. He's been forced to change by encountering all of these challenges that he had to overcome in some way. And he is either changed enough to be able to actually win his wife back and meet her properly, or to attempt, or he hasn't changed enough and he will fail. And that's the tragedy story rather than a happy ending. But it's all about his transformation, and that's what makes it interesting. We, as an audience, are not interested in watching if there is not a transformation that happens. We just don't, we're not even conscious of it, but we're not interested in watching. We get bad reviews if there's no change in the character throughout the whole story.
Huh. I'm listening to this as somebody who is not a huge movie person. Like, I'm just not. I'm more of a book person, which is, the same experience. But I'm thinking, as I'm hearing you, I'm like, oh, that's the piece that we're looking for, that transformational piece. And I think sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in, the special effects and everything else. And you're right. If there's not a good story, if there's not a good a transition, something that pulls us in, we're not going to be that interested. We're not going to be so interested in watching. And so I'm curious. I'm curious how that relates to fantasy. Tell me more.
Hey, well, I would love to tell you more. So, yes, books are even, books are delicious, wonderful. All stories keep us fascinated by the obstacles that main character, the protagonist, has to achieve in order to get his transformation and meet his desire, or hers, but we just used a he, so we'll do it. I was going with he. So we're actually only interested if there's obstacles in the way that force transformation. So we're actually fascinated by the challenging parts. If everything just goes nice, and then it stays nice, and then it's just nice, there is no story. It's like we're on our way to Las Vegas, but this thing went wrong, and now we have to navigate this, and now we have to discover ourselves in this way. And all of the comedic rubbish that probably goes down in order to get there. Like, that's the bulk of the story, is actually obstacles. Sexual fantasies, like, we think we love sex that's just nice. If you ask most people what their favorite sex was, the most amazing peak experience in the past, they'll tell you the part where they'd already broken through. They'll go, oh my God, we felt so connected. I just lost myself. I could just feel nothing but pure pleasure. It was so incredible. I just couldn't think anymore. I was just feeling. It was just primal. We were in sync. I didn't know where I finished and they began. It was just amazing, this sex. But what they don't tell you is how they got to that open state. Mm-hmm. What made it exciting to get there? Because you don't start that open, do you? You start with your guards up. You don't start dancing like no one's watching. You start standing on the edge of the dance floor, working up the courage to get on the dance floor. You have to transition from closed to open. Mm-hmm. Sexual fantasies are the exact story that we need to hear so that we can open to the vulnerability of connection. They transform us, and they include all of the perfect obstacles for us to encounter and transform so that we can get to the other side. We can let our guards down. We can dance like no one's watching. We can lose ourselves. in the moment. And once I recognized that, I said, oh my goodness, sexual fantasies aren't necessarily focused on your childhood unfinished business. They are just mimicking the cycle. They're just a very normal, healthy mechanism. They are exactly what we need just to change from one state of consciousness to another. There's always going to be resistance to opening up to somebody else vulnerably, intimately, showing them your body, showing them what turns you on, letting them see you like jiggle all of your bits in complete abandonment. There's going to That's wonderful.
Yeah, I just need to pause for a second because I really, what I heard you say is something that I hadn't heard before that is just so profound. And that is, when we talk about the best sexual experiences, the peak experiences, they're as you said, they didn't start that way, right? There was unwrapping that had to happen before we get there. And I think in some ways, hearing you say that makes me think like some of, some of the best experiences I've had have been with people in situations where I knew I was never going to see them again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and, maybe that's part of the fantasy piece is it's like, knowing that that it's this one thing and I get to be everything all at once. Um, and so
Safe
that's
from consequences, so you're free to be.
exactly. Whereas, like, in other situations, certainly with my partner, we've been together a very long time, and it's taken us a while to go through all of the different roller coaster rides of sex to like, oh, now there's this way that we're together now that is so different than it was in the beginning partly because we've unwrapped a lot of stuff. And so, partly because we know what look is going to work for each other and partly because, we're committed to like continuing to feed the fires of attraction and togetherness. But, just again, what I really heard you say is like getting past that obstacle, like that's the fuel for the fire, if I'm hearing it correctly. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. So, what happened? Like, I love your story, by the way. You sound like you're so onto it with your partner. That's excellent. What I noticed that was super exciting to me is number one, this is not about pathologizing from your childhood. It's about it's just a natural, normal, healthy resistance that every ego has, right? To being vulnerable. That's just a normal, healthy thing for us. We have to shift from one state of consciousness to another.
Mm-hmm.
And sexual fantasies are the vehicle or a vehicle with which we can do that.
Mm.
They are they shift us from closed off and thinking in our everyday logic that is linear and knows how to do tax forms to oh my god, everything's now an innuendo. I'm horny now. I now think differently. I feel differently. That hot dog is now looking very suggestive. Like it's a different way of being. It changes your mind, your emotions, even your nerve endings. That's an altered state of consciousness to become horny,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're now different. Horniness is just the first layer of where you can go. There's an incredible, like I just described before, some of those peak experience. That's also a beautiful erotic state of consciousness. So sexual fantasies is the story we need to hear. Specifically, our egos need to hear in order to stand down and let us be vulnerable enough to connect and to just let go and just go into pure experiencing. So this is a natural mechanism. It doesn't necessarily mean you've got childhood wounds or things that you need to go see a therapist about, although that might come through in your fantasies too. I'm not saying that's not there. I'm just decentering that part and recentering this, saying even if you had the perfect childhood, just the natural, healthy, normal psychological mechanisms of having to move from one state of consciousness to another requires us to come up against our own internal resistance, our fear of vulnerability. And sexual fantasies are genius because they include our ego's fear of vulnerability. In so many fantasies are egoic in theme, and they resolve that theme for us. So they don't just include the fear, they include this antidote. So it's the poison plus the antidote equals this access to these expanded erotic states of consciousness, these beautiful places, these feelings we're trying to feel together. And when you recognize that, when I sat my clients down on the red velvet couch in the divinery and I asked them all about their peak experiences and their sexual fantasies, I didn't try and live out their sexual fantasies as a sex worker. I listened instead. How did their mind make it safe for them to open up and drop deep into those states? And then I brought that part to life in our real life play. And that's when really, really interesting things started to happen. That's when somebody I just met 2 hours ago was, wow, I had no idea I could feel this way. I've had so much experience with sex or with BDSM for years. And I thought I'd felt everything because I'd felt subspace and I'd gotten really horny and had all these sexy times. But what is this feeling? This is new. This is astonishing. What even is this? I don't even know what it is. It feels like drugs, except not drugs, because it's not escapism. It feels like being the most real me that I've ever been. This is who I always was and was trying to find. And I realized they're finding their biggest sense of self.
Mm.
Happens when their ego gets out of the way. You have a little ego dissolution experience. Your ego is now appeased. It stands down, sits in the back seat of the car. It's not clinging to the driver's seat anymore. They've now got access to a bigger sense of self beyond their normal idea or experience of themselves. And they can share that with someone else. And that, to me, is astonishing. Like, how can our wonderful little smutty stories of threesomes and, golden showers and strap-on play or and gangbangs end up being these profound experiences that you could absolutely, many people do interpret as spiritual experiences of awe and wonder and amazement and connection. Yeah.
So good. Just hearing you say that, like my whole body is all lit up. And I know that you have an amazing story of how you got here. And I'm wondering if you could share just a little bit of that, because it does lead to the red velvet couch, which I want to talk about more, and your discoveries. So would you be willing to share a little bit more about your backstory and how you started discovering the tools of opening up?
Okay, so give me a clue on which part you were interested about, because I can focus on anything. What?
Well, just your whole journey into being a dominatrix and your whole, being able to figure out like how to ask the right questions. What is it where to focus in? Because, you can look at somebody's fantasy and say, oh, you want black leather and high heels. I can do that. But what you're talking about and some of the process that you brought in to help create these experiences is more than just what is it got to look like.
Mm-hmm. It's more than just what it's got to look like and what physical activity you're doing. It's this emotional and psychological aspect as well. Because we are entire beings. The best sex is obviously going to include the whole of us, not just part of us, right? Not the more you include, the more amazing it's going to be. But yes, I was brought up very Christian in an extremist breakaway cult. It wasn't officially a cult. I don't know. It's a cult-like. It's got all of the hallmarks. Anyway, where sex and anything to do with the body was evil. And we weren't even allowed to have herbs in our food because that would excite the senses too much. No drums in the music. That might make you too connected to your body. The body was pretty much evil. You had to focus on spirit only. And I was having sexual fantasies from a very young age. In fact, if you're wondering if you're normal, sexual fantasies do start from about age 5. This does not mean that 5-year-olds are ready to engage in sex with themselves or with anybody else. They might be curiously exploring themselves, but it's not the same thing. They're not ready for that at all. They don't want it. They don't even understand it the same way we do. But your erotic mind is forming at the same time as your muscles are forming, and your personality is forming, and your idea of the world is forming. So I started having fantasies that I didn't understand from a very young age, while being told that all of this stuff was terrible and from the devil. The clitoris is the devil's doorbell. Don't press it. And then I was discovering all of these interesting expanded states of consciousness. Like I would through prayer and church, very fervent prayer, access these expanded states of consciousness that were ecstatic, that felt like feeling one with God, that felt like being connected with something much bigger than myself, which was open and profound. Later on, as I got older, I put different meaning on that. But at the time, I only had the model that I grew up with, and with it to interpret that. So I've been encountering these expanded states of consciousness for a long, long time. And later on, I was afraid of sex, and I had to choose whether or not I was going to suppress it or whether I was going to choose to figure out what it meant. I was afraid. I was experiencing other people trying to take from me because I had these giant boobs of doom from age 12. And they were desiring me in a way that was for their benefit. They weren't trying to give to me. They were trying to take from me. And that felt like using and objectifying, and that was horrible in real life. Like I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
My sexual fantasies, I was turned on by it.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on there? How can I even make sense of that? How could I even? I don't know. Then later on, like I was really conflicted, and I had the choice of either shutting it down and suppressing my desire altogether, which I think a lot of people do choose, or going towards it. And I chose, if I'm afraid of something, I'm going to go poke it with a stick and see how it works. I'm going to go tickle it and see if it has a reaction. So long story short, I ended up doing a whole lot of different things, all sorts of different things, including working in sex shops and learning from some of the world's most incredible sex educators and erotic practitioners of the erotic arts, and learning all sorts of things. But it wasn't until I actually decided to become a sex worker and a professional dominatrix that it really hit home, that I started to really deeply understand how this works. And that was some of the most enlightening and powerful experiences of my life happened through that. It was profound. But when I first started sex work, I just wanted money, didn't I? I just wanted money really quickly. I had an operation to pay for, and I needed a lot of money really quickly. So I wanted money, and they wanted boobs. All right, then, I said, let's do an exchange. And I didn't try to make sex holy. I didn't try and make it clever. I just went along and asked them what they were interested in, and they were all different. Every single one of them was different. It was like walking into an improv acting scene where they all knew what the script was and I didn't, and I had to just guess. And I didn't know what I was doing, because they had meaning making running in the back of their mind about what sex is, that they thought this is just the way sex is, but actually it wasn't. It's the way they need the sex to be. And I mean things like I had to work out on the fly in the heat of the moment. Are they excited by someone who's going to take control and is strict and dominating? Are they going to be more excited by somebody who looks at them with big old doe eyes and is all innocent and non-threatening so that they can feel like the manly one who's showing me the way? Or is it more exciting if I am a bit closed off, but then become wild and lose control, like, cracking the facade of the corporate person and seeing that they're really primal animal underneath, What, do they like it nurturing, like I'm doing this for their own good? Did they like it when I was actually being a bit more like a schoolgirl bully? Each of them do they like it primal, where I'm being talking dirty? Did they like it sensual and intimate? What were they trying to feel? I had to work out really quickly what they were trying to feel. Well, they had no way of describing it to me because they thought that's just how it is.
Mm.
I'm like, okay, I need to take a closer look at their turn-ons. I need to understand what's happening here. Turns out I was really good at winging it. And when I trusted their turn-ons and I figured it out and I actually became the thing that they needed me to become, that's when really somebody that I just met, we would both end up in these places where our guards were completely down. And we'd sometimes even cry. They came in, initially on the phone call, they'd said, how much? What do you look like? When I very, 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 very first started, before I got sophisticated, it was just a newspaper ad. So they didn't even know anything, right? So they're just like, how much? What do you look like? Do you do this sex act? And they're already horny, and all they can think of, they're not even thinking of me as a person. They're just thinking, have you got the right bits? I need you as a prop in my fantasy, basically. And by the end of that session, we were both astonished to the point of tears and wonder of what just happened. Wow. And it felt like I don't know if we have life before and after this life. I have no idea, but it really felt like what I could see in their eyes and they could see in mine was the part that has always lived and always would. If there's such thing as a soul, that was what was in the driver's seat by the end. And I was like, wow, what's happening here? What even is this? And I could feel how it felt a little bit similar, or a lot similar, to those awe and states that I got through prayer younger. Like, wow, this is an altered state of consciousness. This is the same sort of feeling. And we've got that same sort of connectedness and that same awe and wonder and feeling like we're both connected to something bigger than ourselves we can't explain. And we are the bigger version of ourselves. And we just did it through really dirty sex by being little pervs together. What is even happening here? What even is this? And that's when I started going, okay, I've got to figure this out. And then it's the anthropology brain kicking in. I can't leave alone. What's happening here? Right? What's happening? And that's when I started that process. I set up a play space in Sydney, became much more sophisticated about it than just having those newspaper ads. And, sit them down on the red velvet couch, have them, we had a little Moroccan tea ceremony, and I would ask them all sorts of questions. And I got better and better and really honed that process of where I could find out, what is their story? What is their sexual fantasy story? What's the emotional aphrodisiacs? What were the particular obstacles they needed to overcome in order to let go? What were their poisons, and what were the antidotes? So, for instance, your point is amazing when you said it's not just the black boots that is the source of excitement. It's what body language did she have? What attitude did she have when she's wearing those black boots? Was she being like a schoolgirl bully? Was she being cold and distant and disdainful? Was she being needy and desiring and begging? Was she being like, what's the story? And lots of my examples that I had available to me by just seeing other people working and reading everything I could, focused on just like, he wants to be spanked, so let's spank him. He wants to be weed on, so just wee him. He wants anal play, so just get the strap on out. And they did not focus on what made it safe for that to work.
Mm-hmm.
So they get sexual excitement, but not necessarily break through to the other side. It was the magic is when I realized, oh my goodness, you have to include the poison and the antidote. That's when this works. And an example would be, no, but let's just go with initially the first one that I was talking about before. I didn't want to be really dominated in real life. I hated it. I didn't want to be really used or objectified in real life. I hated it. But yet it was super exciting in sex. And when my lovers tried to live that out with me, because I told them it was exciting for me, it didn't feel like I fantasized. It didn't quite, I could get sexually excited, but it wasn't quite right. Something wasn't hitting the right spot because they weren't including both the poison and the antidote. They were just including the poison.
So I just want to be really clear that I get what you mean by including the poison and the antidote. So, for instance, are you saying that the poison is the thing that they're doing, or is that the fantasy and the antidote is the resolution? I'm a little confused there, and I just really want to make sure.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Thank you for asking for clarification. Thank you. Excellent. The poison is what our ego fears about will happen if we're vulnerable. If I ask someone out on a date, they might reject me and I might get laughed at.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can't do that. I'll stay over here even though I really want to ask them. Oh no, I can't do it. I'm scared. I'm scared of the rejection. If we're vulnerable, there's always, it's very like, we're always afraid of vulnerability, even though we want it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So the poison is what we fear would happen if we do become vulnerable. The antidote is the thing that resolves that fear for us and makes it safe for us to. Now let me give you an example in sex so that it's not so intellectual. Let me tell you about the smutty part. That's the fun part, right?
Okay. Yes, let's do it. Come on, the smut.
If you are being used in real life, that just hurts, right? If you are being used in a sexual fantasy, there is them taking on the body language as though they're being selfish and they're just doing it for their own sake. Well, how that benefits me as somebody fantasizing about it is if they're being selfish and they're just taking for their own sake, their needs are already met. I no longer have to focus on taking care of getting them off. I can now focus on myself and I can just surrender into the moment and I can believe that I am desirable because they're selfish. They wouldn't be taking from my body and if it wasn't desirable to them. So I'm no longer afraid of that my body's not good enough. I'm no longer afraid that I have to hold back because I'll be too much and that it's too selfish and needy if I ask for my needs to be met. They're using me. They're doing it for themselves. If you just try and use someone for real, like if you take that fantasy literally, your partner just try and use you for real and be selfish, you don't get the antidote. The antidote in the fantasy version of this, as they're selfishly using you and turning you into just an object, they're also magically touching you exactly the way you want to be touched for as long as you want to be touched at the right pressure, the right stroke. They're giving you all of the right things that you've been craving to have, but you felt too selfish or unsure about or wasn't sure about taking for yourself. They're now giving you everything and you get to experience it just perfectly. So if you bring it to real life, you have to only role play that you are being selfish and objectifying them, while actually the scene is entirely about giving that person the touch that they've deeply yearned for a very long time, which is the exact opposite of being selfish. You've got the poison and the antidote, and that creates the right psychological response for that person to be able to just receive for as long as they want to, as greedily as they need to, in order to open up.
I love hearing that, and that just makes so much sense. And I want to kind of go in a little bit, like maybe I've got a couple of questions on some of the other examples. So again, just to make sure I've got this clear. So if somebody comes in to talk to you, and what they say is, you know, I want to be pegged,
Yes.
right? So there are a lot of things that can go with that, right?
Yep.
And but being pegged or pegging is the action. And so you're going to so that wouldn't necessarily be the poison. The poison would be the reasoning around pegging. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes, you're onto it. So pegging is just touching a part of the body that feels good. Doesn't have any meaning in it, inherent meaning. Any meaning we put on, and for anyone who doesn't know what pegging is, that is using a strap on a dildo on some, and often it is anally, anal sex. So, yes.
Thank you for reminding me. Not everybody might know that term, but yes. So, but there's so what you're saying is there's lots of reasons or lots of fantasies that might go along the setup around it. It could be, that this is like they're two sailors and, they haven't seen a woman in a long time. And it's just, there's sexual release there. Or it could be ceremonial, an opening, if you will. Or it could be, so the story is what you're calling would the story be the poison or the antidote?
The story is the entire shebang. It is the vehicle with which we discover the poison and the antidote. And the poison is just like you're a lovely sailor example. Let's go with that. Let's pretend that they're a heterosexual person and they've come and asked for pegging and they say, and I heard this a lot, I'm not gay, but I have this fantasy. And, there's nothing wrong with being gay, but I actually do believe them in this instance that there's not necessarily suppressed. It might be suppressed homosexual desire, but very often it's not. It's just their poison is they've been told only gay people enjoy anal sex.
Oh.
They believe that if I like being touched on the bottom, if I access my internal natural pleasure that is there, I must be gay. And so their fantasy has said, oh, you're afraid to do that in case you're gay? Okay, let's include the thing you fear. Let's make a scenario where you get the way that you get this touch is through another sailor, and there's no access to any other women around, and somehow proximity and forced proximity will create the situation which makes it temporarily okay for you to have this sex. Maybe it's forced on you. Maybe it's, I don't know, something happens. But what will happen then is now that they've got permission to actually feel the thing that they wanted to feel, they will actually get touched in exactly the way they want to be touched. They will now have access to it. And there'll be something in the way that story unfolds that doesn't just live out the fear, but actually creates a scenario where they get the exact opposite to what they feared would happen. Right? They actually get to feel I haven't prepared. I don't have enough. Our imaginary sailor thing. I need to know more about the fantasy before I could work out what the exact antidote is. But I'll tell you a really common one that's got a similar thing that I am aware of, which is I'm going to be. I can't touch my bottom. If I enjoy anal sex, that means I'm girly because only girls surrender. Men are never vulnerable. Right? I am a manly man. So if I can't touch my bottom, and yet bottoms, by the way, everybody, like having this belief is absolutely heartbreaking to me because it's like telling a woman that she's only allowed to touch her clitoris and not allowed to touch her G spot. Like, it's like you're penis is the equivalent of your clitoris, while your internal prostate pleasure, your internal that's like your G spot. That's naturally pleasurable for all of the people who have prostates. That's naturally pleasurable. But there's all of these social pressures, and there's all of these beliefs that mean that you feel as though you can't be vulnerable enough to be the one bending over and receiving and surrendering and letting go and feeling. You think that that's only women allowed to do that. So the fantasy might be, mistress, I really want you to peg me. Can you call me a sissy slut and make me wear pink panties while you're doing it? All right. So there's the fear included. There's our poison. Like, if I'm vulnerable, I'll be turned into a girl. I'll lose my social status as a boy, as a manly man. If I'm vulnerable. But this fantasy has to give permission. So somehow she might, like in his fantasy, maybe she's calling him a sissy slut. But she might be even mocking him and making him feel humiliated. I have to listen to hear the body language that his fantasy was. I can't make it up. I have to listen and bring that on. But there might also be this antidote where she's actually having the time of her life and she's turned on despite herself. Oh, I'm not rejected for being a vulnerable man. I'm being accepted by a woman in my vulnerable state. Oh, there's the antidote. I feared that I would never be loved by a woman again if I wasn't manly. But here I am being open and vulnerable, allowing myself to feel everything. I just want to let go and just feel. And I'm being desired by a woman at the same time.
So good.
Exact opposite to what you feared would happen. Poison plus antidote, right?
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the common fantasies that you've run across? And I know what you're saying. I definitely heard that, like, each one has a very specific to the person, but I'm imagining that broad strokes, there are some common fantasies that you ran across.
Yes. So there are genres of fantasies. Like, there's noticeable patterns. Like, we've got 3 people wanting to be turned into maids this week. We've got 2 people who want to have foot fetishes this week. We've got a whole stream of people coming in now, suddenly all wanting to be turned into a slave and humiliated or embarrassed, or a whole bunch of people who want to receive, who want to worship a goddess and just be in sensual awe of her body. These are themes that are recognizable, and you can say, okay, that's that kind of genre fantasy. Gangbangs and public sex and cheating and all of these things are very, very common fantasies. But they're always, all roads lead to Rome. They're always just ways to create the safety for your mind to surrender to vulnerability. All of them. It's all of them.
So I want to go a little bit deeper into this idea of creating safety. And what are some of the ways that that you're able to create safety, or that people listening can create safety in their partnerships to play at this level?
It is an art form. So this is why it is actually, I actually train some of the world's leading sex workers and dominatrices, and I also train sexologists, and a whole lot of therapists come to see me that I don't necessarily advertise directly to therapists, but therapists are recognizing that I have something very important, and they want to learn it for themselves, for their own sex lives, but they also want to be able to use these tools with their own clients to be able to understand these psychological parts of our sexual fantasies and how to bring them out of our heads and into our beds safely. And we don't have the it is absolutely important to be able to start recognizing these things, and I have to teach people how to do them. Like, it's not something I can go, just do this and it'll all be safe. Actually, it really does take learning some skills. And I also teach people who really want a rich sex life, who they want to, they're self-discovery people, and they want to use the lens of the erotic to make a really rich self-discovery and share this part of themselves as well. So the very first thing that I teach people is how to form a new relationship with desire itself, to understand how desire works, to form a new relationship with this part of ourselves we haven't known how to trust, because you don't trust a force of yourself that makes you seem to desire things you don't want to do, like cheating when you don't want to cheat, right? Well, how do you even make sense of that? How do you understand what it's trying to do? And then I teach people how to break down the map so that they're including the right parts. And then I teach people the skill of how to ask for the right things for each other, so that their psychological and emotional safety is included in their play. So those three skills are part of the training that I offer. But there are things you can start doing straight away. There are you can start revealing your unique patterning, because yours will be different to your partner's. The things your ego needs to hear in order to become safe, to become turned on and vulnerable, will be different to your partner's, because they have a different ego. Their ego needs to hear a different story in order to be appeased. They have different fears, right? So one of the things we're always trying to do is we're trying to create safety for ourselves by having the other person be turned on by exactly the same thing we're turned on by. Where it's like, I can't show you my fantasy about pegging unless you're into pegging too. Like if you're not fantasizing it, you're not into it, I can't share this part of myself with you. It's too vulnerable. If you don't naturally want to take on the body language that creates the poison and the antidote for me, then it's not real, you're faking it, and it's not safe for me. And we've this attitude of, I have to find someone who's naturally got exactly the same erotic narrative story as me. We have to, first of all, the very first thing, in order to make ourselves safe, is to let that go. We have to allow ourselves to be who we are. We have to allow ourselves to be different. We have to shift our source of safety from, I need you to be turned on by what I'm turned on by, to, I'm here because I want to be here doing this with you. And we go into play zone together. It is a privilege for me to be in play with you, and allowing ourselves to be different. If you do not allow yourselves to be different, you cannot be safe to even begin to have the real conversation about what turns you on.
I just have to pause you there, because I really want to underline what I'm hearing is that safety begins with oneself and not searching outside for that person's, approval, or that person's to match exactly, but to show up and, really allowing yourself to be seen. And what that actually means is allowing oneself to be vulnerable.
Yes.
And, so it's so often that I hear, somebody's looking for a safe space, or the space isn't safe, or this person isn't safe. And it's like, there are certainly places where that's true. And more often than not, what I see is people not being willing to actually come back to themselves and say, this is it. This is who I am. This is what I want to play with. And I invite you in to come and join me. And I want to do it with you. Like, I loved hearing that piece there.
Yes. Yeah, you've got it. You nailed it. Beautiful. And I think one of the first things you can do, though, to be able to do this, is to create the safety to go, I'm different to you. I've put together a little freebie exercise you can go and do just to get this started, where you can reveal to each other just a little bit of your own wiring without having to reveal your whole fantasies. You can do this by simply Google searching celebrity images of people that you find hot, and go look at several different images of the same person and go, okay, and it's obviously they're physically attractive, but we're not focusing on the physical part here. We're looking at the psychological part because they're the same physical person in each of the photos. And yet you'll find yourself drawn to some photos more than others. Why? That I'm going to walk you through how to start understanding, oh, that one turns me on more because it represents this kind of poison and antidote for me. Oh, and by looking at the body language and the subtle differences, and you will feel it. You'll go, they're like, I can see they're attractive, they're beautiful in all of these pictures, yet I really feel drawn to that one and not that one. Why? So you can do that with each other and start to realize, oh, we are different in a non-threatening way. And also it's a really fun exercise. And you can feel at the same time how fun and intimate it is to share your differences and play with them together and start like just taking on little body language things for each other and getting a reaction for each other. So you can get that one at myfantasies.com, and that'll get you on my mailing list too, so you can find out about all of the other sexual fantasy breakdowns that I send out to people and show you how it works, and you'll find out about the Spirituality of Smut book when that comes out as well.
I'm so excited about that. So in a minute, I'm actually going to invite you to also talk a little bit about like what working with you might look like. But I want to take a quick moment and just tell people how they can support the Better Sex podcast. Because, as we've been talking, sex is a complex subject and it can make or break a relationship. And unfortunately, most of us don't grow up in an environment where talking about sex is welcome. And that's why I offer a sexual mastery breakthrough session. It's a personalized one-on-one experience so that you can have more satisfying sex life. And let's face it, a podcast, even as great as this one is just not enough. You really need to personalize things. And so I invite you to check out the show notes and join me for a breakthrough session. So that's one way you can support the podcast. And I would love to hear more about what does it look like to work with you?
Well, I was just thinking about how amazing that sounds to work with you. That was fantastic. Everyone should go and work with you. That's great. They need some mastery. So I'm focused more on the advanced people. So people who've already done some self-discovery, they've already done some sex workshops, learned a few things. How I work is I'm mostly focused on the traineeship. Like this is an art form, and I'm teaching people to be erotic artists. How do you really understand the erotic psyche and create incredible experiences that explore the depths of yourself and share that with somebody else? How do you use play and embodiment and explore states of consciousness together? So I teach people over Zoom. And I teach them over a 6-month period of time. They have to commit to a 6-month period of time. I'm training everybody who's going to be the ones that teach you. And as my trainees keep finishing, I'll have a list of people who is like, if you want to learn this method and you're not quite as advanced yet, these people will be the ones you go and learn from. They can be your coach or your therapist or your sex worker, right?
So you're training the trainers.
Yeah, I'm training the trainers mostly. And sometimes I'll take people who are not the trainers because they're just advanced and they're ready for it and they're just hungry for this kind of life. But it's 6 months. It's over Zoom. It is non-explicit. I don't do any explicit activities with people. But I do guide people through exercises. So it's not just talking at them. It is about taking them through guided visualizations or physical exercises so that they can feel the mechanisms at work for themselves, teaching them practical tools as well as the philosophy. And the 3 pillars of it are that you first learn the desire compass. You first learn a deep and rewarding and rich 2-way relationship with this incredibly wise force inside of you, because it knows the way. It knows how to open you up. It's incredible. And the second part is understanding and mapping your unique and erotic narrative through your sexual fantasies. and your peak experiences. And the third one is the journey, which is how do you actually bring this out of your head and into your bed and share it with somebody else in such a rich way? Like, how are you going to get them to get it and do it? And that's one of the things with sex coaches is they're always teaching their partners how to do the things, because that's by nature of being a sex coach is you geek out about this stuff and you learn more techniques. Then you have to be the one to bring it to your partner who doesn't know them, and they get in teacher role. This is a way of how not to do that. How to get your needs met together. Oh my God.
That sounds so good. So, so good. So, is there anything, so if somebody's listening, and what was like the one thing that you want to make sure that they did not miss along the way? If they're going to walk away with one thing, what might that be?
You can actually trust your desire. You can trust it. It's you just need to understand what its language is really trying to say. It's not designed to give you instructions for how to behave in the outside world. You know, desire is wanting. I want. And we're not used to trusting that, because wanting often happens in the form of spending all of your tax money on hats or eating all of the chocolate and none of the vegetables, right? It doesn't seem like a wise force, but that's when we're trying to take it literally.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's not, so don't ask it to do what it's not made to do. It doesn't know. We need to tune into a different organ of the psyche to know how to behave in the outside world. What desire is a genius for? What it knows is it knows exactly how to appease your ego so that you can change from one state of consciousness to another. It knows how to take you home to yourself. It knows the way. So if you know how to form a relationship with this part of yourself and you can trust yourself, you'll be able to invite other people into that journey with you. So
that sounds like the beginning of another incredible conversation. So I hope you'll come back and we can dive deeper into desire. But that is so yummy and juicy, and I'm just so delighted to have you here as my guest. Please, where's the best way to find you? And we will put we'll put it all in the show notes, but I just want to, for those of you that are driving down the road, where's the best way for people to find you?
I would love to come back and talk to you again. So let's do that for sure. Okay. The best way is actually to get on my mailing list, so go get that freebie that I'm offering you. I'm teaching you some of the stuff that I'm teaching some of the world leading sexperts. Come and learn the secrets at myfantasies.com. That will get you on my mailing list, because us people who talk about sex get kicked off social media all the time. I don't focus so much on trying to build my social media platforms because it's just not worth it for us. So I make my mailing list a source of lots of generous tips for you so that you're motivated to be there. But if you're interested in working with me, you need to go to artemisiadevine.com. We're going to have all of the links to other podcasts and blogs and ways of actually getting coaching with me and seeing where I am, because I'm going to be in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm in Australia at the moment. I'm going to be in Europe and who knows, I might offer some workshops.
Are you going to California?
Well, I'm just waiting for some people to invite me, because I don't have any of the connections. So if you want to bring me in,
we'll have to have a longer conversation offline. But thank you so incredibly much. My guest today is Artemisia de Vine, and she is all of that. I'm so excited to have been able to have this conversation, this deep, rich conversation about fantasy. Please do yourself a favor, get on her mailing list, check out her freebie, myfantasyis.com. All right. Beautiful. And again, everything will be in the show notes. Thank you so incredibly much for coming to share your wisdom with me and with my guests or with my listeners. And yes, part 2 down the line, absolutely. So, so lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you have gotten, some wisdom from this episode, I invite you to share it far and wide. If you know somebody who needs to hear what we've been talking about, please share this episode. And otherwise, I invite you to like, subscribe, comment wherever you get your podcasts. And on that note, keep it sexy.